Well, thanks everybody for coming back this afternoon. I know it's been an energizing conference, but you're probably getting a little tired at the end of the day too. But fortunately, we've got some folks with some great insights from their experience as producers in various parts of the country and being very creative and innovative with their work. So I'm looking forward to hearing some of the things they have to say. We're going to take kind of a similar approach to what we did with our other panels in that they'll each make an opening statement. You can kind of get a little bit of a feel for what their perspective is just from that little snippet. And then if you're interested in asking them a question, you've got a few note cards on your table. In about roughly 10 minutes, we'll have some staff that I'll call on to bring those forward. And then we'll include some of those questions in the panel discussion as we go forward. So they're going to start off, and they've been forewarned about this, with just taking 2 or 3 minutes to share briefly their thoughts on, what are a couple key sustainability opportunities and challenges, or reflect just, where we're going with sustainability. So we'll just start out with you, Anna, since you're closest to me. Go ahead.
So I'm not really great about following instructions sometimes. But, and given all of the work I've done in sustainability beyond just our farm, I took the assignment to think about 30 years from now. And what does that look like? And I think from a sustainability perspective, it's really about telling the story for yourself and your place and putting yourself in that space in the future. So I actually had a little fun with Doug the other night, and we wrote a little story about what would be happening on our farm in Montana in 2048. So just humor me a little bit and use this as a way to think about your own story. So, okay, imagine with me it's 2048. I'm not going to quite be 80 yet. I don't know how old all of you will be. Maybe some of you won't even be here anymore.
What are you talking about?
It frames it up really differently, doesn't it? Like, how much time do you have? And then, Doug and I are actually going to be entering our 40th season farming, and we're super thankful to those that worked for that forward-thinking beginning farmer policies that let us start back in the 2009. And we're actually celebrating, in 2048 we're celebrating that the combination of the right to a clean and healthy environment, which is in the Montana Constitution, climate change, and the ending of cheap energy has enabled some forward-thinking policies that significantly grow the organic acreage in Montana. So a girl can dream, right? Of the 18 million acres of cropland in Montana right now, we grew that from a 1% share in 2018 to a 50% share in 2048. Long-term diverse rotations, grazing, integrated cover cropping, that's now considered conventional. Tillage is no longer a black and white issue, but it's a thoughtful disturbance as part of our overall cropping system. And we actually have a super winter hardy variety lentil, so we can manage our workload between fall and summer. Each and every farm is a unique organism, and our wildlife pollinators and our soils are thriving. So here's my second part of this. The average age of a farmer in Montana has plummeted from 58.9 to 45, as farming has become a valued profession in Montana. We were hoping that'd be lower, but you all know transitions are really hard, and Doug still has a tractor wheel in his hand. We're actively recruiting Montana kids that stay and other bright stars to come. We passed legislation in Montana that eliminates student loans for those who commit to working in agriculture in a rural place. Yeah. Organic farming in Montana is recognized as one of the most entrepreneurial opportunities that exist. Becoming a farmer or making a livelihood as a valued farm employee on an organic farm is a legitimate, long-term, well-paying career. To grow nutrient-dense food in partnership with nature and recognized as a land stewardship professional, gosh, what's better than that, right? But much of this has been possible through the rearrangement of risk relationships between farmers and the rest of the supply chain. Multi-year contracts, contracts that support transition to organic, and contracts paying a base amount no matter what the climate variabilities are that particular year are the norm. Crop insurance as we know it has been eliminated, and diversified low-input farming systems are viewed as less risky and smart-term investments. Used to be that 85% of our farmers had an off-farm job, but we've created a better system for health insurance, and those who want to give all of their heart and soul to their farm get to do that because that benefits the health of all of us. Our rural economics are thriving. Most farms in Montana now have solar and our wind systems, And we're charging all of our electric equipment. Doug spent, I think, an hour last night looking at YouTube videos on electric equipment. It's kind of amazing. Like, we skipped right over the biofuels. Harvest with electric combines is really quiet. And we've actually turned the corner and have downward trending greenhouse gas emissions. But we're struggling with the effects of emissions that we emitted in the 20s. And while much of Montana still maintains our frontier classification of less than 6 people per square mile, we have a thriving agritourism economy. So we all share the sad story about the role agriculture played in melting the glaciers in Glacier National Park, but we also interpret nature's ability to be resilient and the importance of us to recognize our inherent capacity for resilience, creativity, and cooperation. And that's the world I want to see in 2048. So what's yours look like?
Okay. What do you got, Keith?
I'm probably one of those that may not be around in 2048, so I don't know. You know, from my perspective, and I probably have a little bit different perspective than my friends up here, because we deal primarily more with commodity type farmers. And so what I see as the opportunities in sustainable agriculture over the next 30 years, it's going to be for the farmer who is able to grow, and you said the term nutrient-dense food. I would look for there to be some sort of label, you know, for nutrient density in food, and not necessarily organic versus conventional, but let's look at what that food actually contains. I think there's going to be tremendous opportunity not only to grow that, but also to market it. And it's oftentimes, and these folks over here have been doing far more marketing than what we have, but it's oftentimes more difficult to do the marketing than it is to do the production. And so there's going to be tremendous opportunities, I believe, for the producers of nutrient-dense food rather than just empty commodities. Because right now, let's face it, so many of us in agriculture have just been growing just empty commodities, and that's why a lot of farmers are in trouble. So I think there'll be tremendous opportunities there for that in the marketing, and a lot of related products and services around that. You know, we're in the cover crop industry. There's tremendous growth potential, not only in selling cover crops, but also in growing cover crops. And you know, we buy cover crops from, you know, people that are farming up in Anna's neighborhood, and we're buying cover crops from all across the country. And if we're going to increase the acreage of cover crops from 17 million to 100 million over the next 10 years, which I think it can easily be done, somebody's got to grow all that. There's going to be tremendous demand to be growing good, high-quality seed, and that's different than just growing a commodity as well. So I see there's lots of opportunities for those who are willing to search out those markets, to make those markets, and to put the effort into doing the marketing.
Very good. Faith?
There's a lot to celebrate in the Hudson Valley in terms of local food and how far it's come since the 80s, since the farm crisis when we lost a lot of our farms. We have over 100 CSA farms in the Hudson Valley. Within 20 miles of our farm, there are 18 other farms that were started in the past 10 years. So we have a very high density of small farms, and we also have a high density of service providers and ag-related nonprofits. The challenge that I would most like to see the food movement take on is that few of us within that community are making living wages. So why is that? The way I see it is due to the wonderful work of many of you in the room, due to SARE, due to ATRA, we have a volume of information. We really have the production practices we need to farm sustainably. What we don't have is the economic framework that allows producers to farm sustainably without asking them to enter or remain in poverty. So how can the food movement take that on? I can see a number of ways. I think, practically speaking, we need to understand that in order to grow sustainable agriculture, we need to also re-envision economic development. I think a civil rights activist I very much admire named Ed Whitfield says that there are 3 forms of social change. One is resistance, one is advocacy, and one is doing for ourselves. So if there's one suggestion I can make to the food community, I would like to see us take on the broader movement for economic justice And I'd like to see us take that on through advocacy, through pushing for federal funding and policy to support climate resilient family scale agriculture rather than corporate controlled agriculture. I would like to see us also participate in a broader movement for economic justice that affects our consumer base by advocating for living wage, minimum wage. I would like to see us do for ourselves as well by facilitating collaboration, both among producers and between producers and service providers and nonprofits. And I think a helpful place to focus our efforts would be on ways of lowering costs and expanding market channels. I loved what you said about changing the risk relationship. I think we need to be focusing on expanding or developing new markets that share risk with producers as we head into an era of increasing climate instability. So I think a lot of our efforts have been focused on beginning farmer training in recent years, and I would love to see us shift our focus toward development of shared resources such as equipment pools, distribution networks, and infrastructure for processing, and on creating those markets that will both share risk with producers and pay fair prices for food.
Thank you. And Wayne, your thoughts?
Mine was very simple. I didn't, the 30-year piece for me was about changing how people see food and see farmers. Right now, there are so many barriers. There's urban farming, there's rural. I was taking a tick sheet during my, all the sessions where I heard urban, I ticked it. Where I heard rural, I ticked it. It's food and it's farming. So we have to be able to market ourselves and use the opportunity that we have with institutions like SARE and opportunities like this conference to figure out ways to market ourselves as a whole to our consumers. Everybody has to eat, but people would be, you're amazed, I'm amazed at the number of people who once they drive to my property say I wasn't that far away, because in the mind of most individuals who aren't connected to the food industry, a farm is 100 miles away in the country. It's not just outside of a city. It's not just off an interstate. When I have kids out, one of the first things that I ask them is, where does hamburger come from? And they all say McDonald's or they say Burger King. They don't say a cow. When I ask them what's inside this egg, you'd be surprised at the number of kids who just look and say a chicken. And I'd say, well, that's technically correct. But there's an egg in there. This is where your egg comes from. So instead of going to a high level where we talk about all these institutional things and changes, we just need to market better. We need to let people know that a tomato doesn't have to cost $5 if it's organic. We need to get to a point that people don't associate food with grocery store. People associate food with the farmer. Without the farmer, the grocery store is out of business. But we focus on markets, we focus on grocery store, we focus on retail. I like to make money, but I like people to know where the food is coming from. So you look about cars, you think about Michigan, you don't think about the internal pieces. You think that cars come from Detroit. Food comes from the farm. 30 years from now, that's all we need to talk about. We need to make sure people know that food comes from the farm and farms can be anywhere.
Yeah, great. So go ahead, be writing those questions. We're going to gather those in a few minutes. I want to stay down with Wayne and with Faith. You two of the group on the stage have probably done the most of this group with marketing. You both have marketed in a variety of ways. So Wayne, talk a little bit about the different ways you market not only your own farm's meat, but I know you've helped other farmers figure out how to market as well. So share a little bit about that.
Well, I may have done too good of a job because we do more than meat. So we also do honey, we have an apiary, we do mixed vegetables, and we also do tours, and we also do consulting. But what I don't market the meat, I market the experience. Okay. So what I listen, if you saw me around here, I'm sitting at a table and I'm listening. My background was in claims. So I was the guy who early on went to your house to get you to sign that paper and I'd give you a check. But how I did that was I may drive past your house once or twice to look to see what was out front. I wanted to see what type of flowers you had. I wanted to see if you had a tricycle with a little kid so that I can know how to reach you. I do the same thing with marketing my farm. I look at, when I see somebody that likes something on my page, I go to their page to see what they like. I want to know what it is that drives them. Why'd they come to my page? Why'd they honor me with a visit or a click or with $1? And then I will do a video or I'll do a post geared towards that group. And if you like something, what do you do on social media if you like it? You share it. So I get people sharing stuff, and I was telling some people today, it was weird having people saying, "Hey, Wayne." And I was like, wow, people are watching these videos and they're seeing stuff and they're like, and they talk to you like, "Hey, how you doing? I saw you last week with your dog and moving the cow and the bees." So, but I market experiences. I market experiences, and it's not canned. I don't try to do something, but I have a pretty good feel of what I'd like to see. And then I try to present that to my audience and to the people who buy my product and experience.
So say a bit more about that. So you're doing some short YouTube videos, or are these, how are you marketing these video clips?
I've been doing, well, there's different phases of it. So I do the rough, dirty farm videos that most people won't get to, they won't have the opportunity to get behind the tiller. They won't have an opportunity to muck a barn and then to get that ready for compost. And they won't have an opportunity to visit a slaughterhouse. I don't show the gore of the slaughterhouse, but I show the cooler. I show the rail system so people can understand, all right, when we kill it here, we take it and chill it here, but it's on a rail and it moves. And and I talk about, I'm a huge proponent, if you ever watch any of my videos, looking at the color of the fat in your meat. If people are telling you that it's grass-fed beef, not finished on something else, the fat should be what? Anybody? Yellow. If it's not yellow, you're probably doing something else. But that's what I do. And I market those experiences. People respond well to that, and I continue, and then I grow from there, from the farm to the markets, and now we do a farm-to-table dinner, and everybody else is doing their farm-to-table dinners on farm. I said I wasn't going to do it on farm because everyone else is doing that, and I found an art gallery, and we lease out space once a month, and the artists are there, so they're working, they're doing everything else, and food is art. So we market that experience of coming to the farm-to-table dinner. It's a high-end 6-7 course meal with a gourmet chef. That's my partner in that venture. I raise all the protein. Everything is local, and the tagline for our farm-to-table is local, local, not 250 miles away local. And people loved it, so we continue to do it. But it's, again, experience.
Local, local, I like that. So Faith, you guys on your farm, you have a collective, you're working together with some partners. How do you approach marketing?
Yeah, so we are one business owned by 3 business partners, one of whom is in the room today.
Business partner.
We sort of went wide in our first 5 years farming. We just finished our 5th season. So we have 10 major enterprises at this point. We raise vegetables, herbs, flowers, pork, chicken, rabbit, eggs, and herbs. And we also run a farm stay program and do on-site events. In terms of our market channels, we have 3 major channels. We do about 40% wholesale, which is both to local restaurants and to a few resellers, often who are also working with restaurants. We do about 40% at 3 markets within between 50 and 100 miles from our farm. And then we also have a full diet CSA that we run from April to Christmas as of this year. That's about 20% of our business. So between 20 and 40 families come pick up boxes of produce, meat, and eggs at our farm for 36 weeks of the year.
That's great. Awesome. And at this point, I'd say if you've got a question on a card, go ahead and hold that up, and some staff will come around and pick those up and bring them forward in a bit. So a couple of you have commented on, how do we help the next generation? Faith, you said it may not just be the traditional beginning farmer programs, but other ways of helping them. And Anna, I know you are doing a lot with Doug to think about helping apprentices and interns and so on. And Wayne, I want to come back to you too, but let's start with you, Anna. on how you approach mentoring folks, and I want to hear about Wayne's experiences too.
Yeah, well, Doug and I thought, man, it's so much fun, and we should have more people near where we live. I think it was 2015 we launched an apprentice program, and we thought we'd have people just knocking down our door. And that hasn't been our case. It's been really fascinating. But we actually have a new agrarian program that we're doing in partnership with Kavera Coalition. That's for someone to come and spend 8-9 months with us, just experience the whole season of being at a at-scale organic grain farm. We've worked with Department of Labor in the state of Montana to stand up a registered 2-year farm apprenticeship on an organic farm, which includes both on-the-job training and curriculum. Much thanks to Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship that I stole a lot of the ideas from. And then the third thing we have is opportunities for other entrepreneurial enterprises underneath us. Like, we would love to have seed cleaning. We would love to have native seed production. We would love to have a grazing enterprise on our operation. So that's kind of the umbrella, but what it takes to mentor, I think was more of your question, Rob, is you gotta really love it. You gotta be open, you gotta be willing to see things from a perspective that you wouldn't necessarily believe or see. We have learned an awful lot from all of our apprentices and folks that come on the farm. Just they offer a different perspective. This next generation has some really amazing qualities around community and connection, but their ideas around risk management, their capacity for risk management, their capacity for credit, their need for this idea of work-life balance. Like, I think the first time one of our apprentices said to Doug, like, well, we need work-life balance, and he just looked at him like, you gotta be joking me. Like, you signed up for a farm apprenticeship. Like, so I think we have to think really differently. We're thinking differently about what's that longer term umbrella that we can create on our operation to provide others. And then one other thing I'll say, Rob, that we're doing with Kavera and also with the Apprenticeship Learning Network that's on our Beginning Farmer or Rancher grant led by Tufts new entry program, of which there's 5, I think, different partners that are all been doing apprenticeships around ag, is how do you also take care of the mentors? Because it takes somebody really special, as many of you know. Like, Faith, you were talking about your land transition, like finding, you think it's magic, find an older retiring farmer and a younger farmer, and that magic just does not happen easily. So we have to also think about the mentors in this and how we help support them and take care of them in this journey as well.
Wayne, you were telling me just a little bit about your Moving Mountains program, which sounded really interesting. So share with the group a little bit about what you do with it.
Sure. So I partner with a mentoring group called Future Mountain Movers. They are from 5th to 10th grade. My son is a part of that. He's in 11th. He's a senior, and he is a counselor since he lives on the farm, and he's running it now while I'm not there. He's on spring break. So the first thing I would say about mentors is, mentees, is for children, you have to either pay them or they have to see a financial path, because they could be an accountant, they could be a lawyer, they could be other things, but if they don't see a financial incentive, they don't see a way to be incentivized financially, there's not going to be any interest in that, especially with millennials. And as a person who was a people leader before I left, I can remember millennials that would say, well, how long before I have your job? And you'd say, well, you just got here. And they were like, well, if I can't do this job in a year, I'm going to quit. And they mean it, and they'll quit. They'll go find something else. So with Future Mountain Movers, what we do is they are integrated into every aspect of the farm. So they help us raise animals, and I will partner with them on the animal. We will then, once we process that animal, we'll serve that animal at one of our dinners. Future Mountain Movers will be either they set the tables up for the 5-course meal, or they are the wait staff. At the end of that dinner, they have an opportunity to present themselves to the crowd of benefactors for either a donation to buy livestock and feed livestock, or for a donation to their website so they can do something civically inclined, start a program for agriculture, visit the Civil Rights Museum in DC. This last month, I think we did $1,500 for them, and we had an angel benefactor who agreed to supply 3 large black sows, plus feed. We were able to retrofit our barn so that they can have their own space. They rent the space from me. So it's not just me giving them money. It's like the financial aspect of it is, all right, you're here, you're learning, you need to pay me, because you're gonna have to pay wherever you go to set up an office. Now, we're not trying to rob them, but they have to understand the full cycle. It can't just be the pie in the sky, everything is great, it's beautiful, I got a grant, and the grant's gonna cover it, but what happens when the grant runs out? Is this sustainable? Because we're talking about sustainable farming. And one thing I would like to give Brennan credit for is helping me, because I'm a capitalist and an entrepreneur, and I was like, if I need a grant to stay open, then I don't need to be open. So I had to learn that it's not just grants to pay for mortgages or for the farm leases, but there are some, and I've learned this today and this week, some very helpful opportunities. And being a little bit stubborn, I probably could have done way more for these kids had I been more involved in programs like this. So that's what we do for the children.
That sounds great. Well, Keith, one of the questions that came up was about the idea of how do you scale up your business and diversify, and everybody here has done some of that, but you've really done that on your farm in terms of not only continuing to farm, but add different crops and add the business of the seed business. I know you spoke about that in one of the breakouts, but not everybody would have heard that. So talk about that transition of scaling up to diversifying, creating new jobs for not only other family members, but some community members.
Sure. So with our cover crop seed business, we kind of got launched in it with we did a SARE grant in 2008 to look at cover crop moisture usage, and as a result of doing that grant, we were convinced that cover crops would work for our area and that cover crop seed was difficult to find and source. So we saw an opportunity. We were looking for opportunities to bring some of the other kids back to the farm, and we really felt this was less risk than trying to go out and rent a whole bunch more farm ground, because we're in an area where it's pretty competitive to try to rent additional ground. So we started green cover seed in 2009. We did our first mixing in 2010. So we basically went from supplying seed for 0 acres to last year we supplied seed for about 700,000 acres in about 8 years. And as a result of that, you know, we went from no employees to now we have about 30 employees. And like we shared at our session, it's hard. It's hard to find good people, and it's hard to manage. Even good people are hard to manage, but bad people are really hard to manage. And so, you know, it's been a challenge from the people side. The business that we're in is very infrastructure heavy. You know, a lot of stuff coming in, a lot of stuff going out. So we've had to build a lot of buildings, a lot of grain bins, figure out a lot of processes, because every mix that we send out the door is different. Everything's custom mix. There's no, you know, we don't have an A, B, and C, pick which one meets your needs the best. So we've kind of had to develop all of our own processes. We've had to write our own computer software. It's just been kind of building it from the ground up. Now, we've made a lot of mistakes. If we were to go do it again, we would certainly approach things differently, but we've learned a lot. So you can scale it up. It scales up pretty quickly. You know, one of the things that has been a great blessing to us is having a good banker and access to credit, because, you know, frankly, we had to borrow money, a lot of money to do it. We had understanding bankers that, you know, in fact, I went to my banker and I said, Bob, said, you're going to see an $80,000 check come through that's going to say radish seed, and we think we can sell it. and he said, well, okay. and we did. So you know, access to credit is a big thing. We were fortunate, again, because in the early years of the seed business were some of the better years we've ever had farming. It was when commodity prices were high. We had a couple years where we had some decent production, so we were able to put a lot of that money back into the seed business and grow that up. But I would say, you know, just finding the right people is really important, and then having a really clear vision of what you want to do. Some of the mistakes that we've made was not having a clear enough vision, not having a clear enough focus of what we really wanted to do. And we tend to get stretched out in too many directions, and then we can't really focus at being good on any one thing. And so recently, one of the people that we've hired we've only ever hired one person that's really had any management experience, because we started out with just our own kids. Yeah, they didn't know anything. We didn't know anything. I don't know how they'd know anything. So we finally hired someone that did have some management experience, and so he's helping us now step through some of these processes to clarify who we are and what we want to do and what we stand for. And that's helping with the hiring process. It's helping with, the focus of, do we want to do this enterprise or do we not? Does this match up with what we do or doesn't it? And so just having that clarity of focus and clarity of values and goals has been a great help. And I would encourage everybody, regardless of your farm size, whether you're a sole proprietor and just getting up and going, or you've got multiple employees, really think long and hard about what your mission statement is, what your core values are, because you will grow. You will be successful. And as you grow, it's much better to have that in place now rather than to go back in 4 or 5 years and wish you would have done it earlier. So that would really be an encouragement that I would give you.
Well, you commented on access to capital, and we all know many aspects of farming can be capital intensive, whether it's buying animals or buying land or equipment. And so there were a couple questions that actually got at that from the risk angle, and I'll just read them, but I think they're both related. One of the people was asking, what is your biggest source of risk in your farm operation? And then another person, and how would you reduce that risk? And then another person asked, what might a risk sharing relationship look like? So Faith, that might be a good one for you, because you were mentioning just quickly, how can we maybe, instead of everybody buying their own piece of equipment, share equipment or take collective approaches to maybe share some of this risk. So talk a little bit about how you think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can approach that question from the marketing angle, which is how we both originally mentioned it. Trying to figure out in this moment when CSA seems to be hitting a wall, at least in our area, the anecdotal sense is that folks are having a really hard time expanding their CSA member base. CSA is something that small farms have really ridden on in terms of supporting new farmers, supporting minority and women farmers and other folks that we really need in the food system. So in the absence of that, or as that becomes threatened, and wholesale really is taking over as the main way that folks are starting their farms, then who shares risk with the farmer? So I think thinking creatively about how we bring those principles into these other market channels and push for the idea that we collectively as a society, as a consumer base, as municipalities, like we are collectively responsible for keeping farming going, not the entrepreneur. I resist the idea that farming is even really entrepreneurship. I think that in order for it to be entrepreneurship, there has to be a certain level of value proposition that I'm not entirely convinced farming meets the definition of. I think it might be better understood as public service. So from that angle, we should think about how we really support farms on all levels as collective bodies. And that could mean something like purchase contracts. That could mean something like being able to take different varieties of products rather than just one. I think we can think creatively together about that. In terms of working together to share resources, both of the SARE grants that I've received have focused on different ways of working together to lower costs, to take on the opportunities and challenges in farming. And there is a wide world out there of ways that folks are doing that. The project I'm working on in this moment that will come out in 2 weeks is on sharing farm machinery. And so there's a wide group of producers out there in the states that are working together to gain access to equipment in a variety of ways. So folks are purchasing equipment in small pools of vegetable producers. Folks are sharing combines. Nonprofits are buying equipment pools to make available to area farmers on a low-cost basis. NRCS offices and conservation districts are purchasing tools, especially with an ecological purpose, such as a no-till drill, to make available to encourage farmers to use that equipment. And I think you can sort of spread that same concept out around any aspect of farming in terms of land access, in terms of bulk purchasing, in terms of equipment access or processing and distribution infrastructure. So I think generally speaking, the math always works out that when you're sharing resources, it lowers costs for everybody, and you can usually scale those resources so that the folks using it are able to do so effectively.
Great. Wayne, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on risk, because you've seen it from both sides, both as a farmer and in the insurance industry. Right. So, how do you look at risk, not only for your own farm, but maybe as you've advised other farmers?
I will say I'm risk adverse. I don't like risk. I don't like taking a leap. I don't subscribe to the build it and they will come model. If I don't have a interest, or if I kind of wait until the customers are like, Wayne, if you don't have eggs, we're going to buy our ground beef somewhere else. And then I know I have a market for eggs. So I'm laughing at that because that actually really happened. I share a lot. So there was a farm that mentored with me for a year. And there's someone else I was having a conversation with this morning about mentoring and investing in the property. So the gentleman that I mentored with, the agreement was we would go in together and buy a herd of cattle. We raised Georgia Piney Woods. It was, if you looked out on the LSU board, it was poster number 58. They used not our cows, but the breed of cows we use. So we went in together. His responsibility to me was a year of labor on my farm. I'd control the herd, I'd manage the herd, I'd select the breeding process. At the end of that year, when we did calving, I selected a replacement bull for my herd, and he went to his farm where then he was able to purchase 30 acres, and all of the pitfalls that I had made the previous 4 years, we jump-started his farm. He didn't have to make any of those pitfalls. So we shared that risk. He shared that risk with me. It's been a phenomenal relationship. He met with a congressman today in the state of Georgia and was plugging me in, and then told me that the Young Farmers Association was here, and he was like, go to their table, talk to them, but it's been a phenomenal relationship. Equipment-wise, I've tried that to share equipment with the folks, and sometimes being in what we do as experts, we are experts. It took me a while to get comfortable saying that to myself. We make things look a little easier, so people will then come along and say, well, all right, well, I'm just going to do what you do. And I had someone come along, and we were going to share a tractor. He wanted to purchase it. I was like, okay, well, if I don't have to pay full price, fine. And immediately decided he was going to go on his own once he got the tractor, because he had a tractor. So at that point, you have to do a little bit better job of evaluating why someone wants to share a risk with you. He wanted to share a risk because he thought that he could do it easy. Now, the corporate side of me waited until he was about to go under before I went to make him a 1/3 offer on that tractor. It was not the tractor, it was the tiller that everybody loves now that you drive by. Yeah. So, but I love sharing the risk because it spreads it out. It's the only way you're really going to do this and make any money, unless you have a rich uncle.
Yep. So Anna, you talked a little bit about climate in your opening remarks, and I'm going to throw this next question to you, which is how can our farms manage the challenge of sustaining under a changing climate?
Well, my answer is going to go back to the risk question you asked, because for Doug and I think that's our biggest challenge. That's our biggest Achilles heel, is we're farming in a place that gets 11 inches of precip a year. We're seeing significantly increased variability. Last year we had a drought with only 2 inches of precip in the growing season. The year before we had 23. So for one farm to weather through that is not an easy thing, which gets me to how do we manage the risk of that, because all of us in this room are eaters, and we all need all farmers available and doing good and on the land for a long time. You don't build soil overnight. So I think part of the solution is what are those cooperative relationships that we can establish through the supply chain, so that in a year where we have a really bad year, we're still getting a base payment for being there and doing what we've done, because we still put the seed in, we still put fuel in the tractor, and meanwhile maybe we've shared a contract with another neighbor who's 150 miles to the east of us, and their crop does better than ours. So somehow we do some shared marketing. That's some of the stuff that we're starting to think about. But I think that's also a question for the supply chain as well, as it's been really easy for the largest supply chain. And we all want to go to a grocery store and buy yummy cereal and crackers and things that are organic. We should all have access to that, as well as the wonderful stuff that Faith and Wayne are doing. But you're not going to do that unless we start supporting all farmers in a way to weather through this climate change issue. And then I could talk also a lot longer on crop insurance and some of the policies that we need to change there too, but I won't go into the disincentives that system is creating for us.
All right, well, the time's been going quickly, so at this point, I'll ask for your maybe closing comment and just take a minute or two. And we talked about maybe just share a hope that you have for our food system going forward, or a particular item that you think would be important for us to address as we go forward with our food system. So Wayne, we'll start with you.
To all the farmers and people that are working in farm advocacy, I would say, closing, there is no competition. We're not competing against each other. There are hundreds of millions of people that need to be fed. So if I have a skill, or if I have something that can benefit you and your operation, I'm going to share it, because I've been gifted with marketing and been able to do that. So I probably will come back and ask you to share either product or produce with me in the sales channel. The one thing I want to look out for is just, and this happened, advocacy folks, if a farmer has an opportunity to talk to a policymaker and you're there and you want to advocate on behalf of the farmer, don't step in front of the farmer to talk to the policymaker, because the farmer actually needs that access to the policymaker. This is a real life scenario that happened. So understand the greater dynamic of what we're doing. We're all working together. But if we don't value the farmer enough to make sure that they can speak for themselves in situations where they're capable, then it's a slippery slope and a sliding scale to nowhere, where we're more theory and activism than we are putting things in the ground.
Okay, Faith?
I think just to reiterate my opening statement, that I think we all need to accept and understand that these challenges that are inherent in agriculture, that have been around for all of our recent memory, we need to solve them to move forward. We will not achieve our goal of 100,000 new farmers in the next decade if we don't increase the value proposition of farming. And that's a sticky problem that in some ways seems outside of our program areas, but in the same way that it would be impossible for the food movement to overlook climate change, the food movement cannot overlook the larger economic patterns that are happening in this country in this time. And we need to think of all the ways that our work within the food system intersects with a broader movement for economic reform.
Okay, Keith?
I think the word that comes to my mind, Rob, is education. What we do as a cover crop company is we spend 10 times more on education than we do on advertising, because we know that if we educate people about soil health, about what's going on in the soil, the only logical conclusion that you can come to is that you have to have cover crops to make that work. So then they sell themselves. I think the same thing can be said with the products that we're growing. If we can educate the consumer about what nutrient-dense food is and why it's important, and healthy food leads to healthy lifestyles. If we can focus on that education, then the only logical conclusion that they can come to is that they need to be buying food locally sourced, grown in a sustainable manner that's going to have a nutrient density that is not coming from just a regular farm, or even a organic farm that maybe is just full-blown tillage and no cover crops. If we can educate the consumer, it will make all of our jobs so much easier. So that's what we focus on in the cover crop side as we transition our production farm to trying to grow more food for the consumer. I think that's the approach that we'll take as well.
That's good. Anna?
I'd say, back to kind of my story, is each of you think deeply about the story in your place, and don't just settle for what you think is doable. I think there's a lot of creativity and cooperation and innovation out there that we're going to solve problems in ways we haven't even imagined yet. And every one of you has to do that in your place at your location, because that's where sustainability really happens.
Well, we've got a couple things left to do, but at this point I want to thank the panel and excuse them from the stage. So thank you.